let's do that. For those who don't know me, I'm Mike Jobbins. I'm the Vice President of Global Affairs and Partnerships, Search for Common Ground. We're an international peace-building organization. I lead a lot of our work with the private sector, as well as sort of the development sector. And we're really delighted to have this conversation, kicking off with two real experts from the continent and advising the continent, and most importantly, sort of thinking about how the U.S. and other outside actors better engage with African partners, and particularly with African youth. So first of all, we have Professor Mohamadu Bassirou Tangara, who's normally in Bamako, joining us from Paris. We're really delighted to have you virtually. Sorry not to have you here in Washington, but I think the coffee and croissants are probably better in Paris than they are here in DC. So welcome. Professor Tangara is by background, he's an expert in rural agriculture and water management and rural development. Most recently, he's been doing a lot of work on the role of the informal economy, informal markets, and how that intersects with young people's livelihoods, especially amidst the kinds of conflicts that are being felt across the Sahel. And then I'm also delighted to have Dr. Fenohasina Rakotondrazaka. I'm very sorry. Malagasy names I struggle a bit. I'm very sorry.
You did a great job.
Maret. We're really delighted. For those of you, many of you may know her from the Urban Institute, from Brookings Institution. She's done her PhD here at GW before crossing Rock Creek to go teach at Georgetown. But we're glad to have you back, have you here at GW, and especially to share some of your experience advising African governments, the governments of Madagascar, Tanzania, and a number of others across the continent, who are really taking your advice quite seriously as they look to see how they can best sort of support economic development in their countries. And then finally, I'm delighted to have, last but not least, Christian Achaleke, who's been, all of us who were up in the upstairs session had a chance to interact with him, but he's a youth activist from Cameroon, has won a half dozen prizes, maybe more, and a real sort of thinker about how development in favor of the most marginalized, but also the biggest drivers of the economy, the young people across the continent can contribute in sort of driving forward a future for Africa, but also a future for the U.S. in its partnerships. But so let me turn over to you, first. As we look around the world today, we're facing extremely tough macroeconomic headwinds in just about every society. Major economies, not only in the European Union, but many of the economies in Africa itself, are looking at slow growth, maybe even tending towards recession. Price of living crises driven by the Russia-Ukraine war. That's the climate change. We can literally rattle off sort of the challenges that the global economy is facing. And in that context, Africa, is one of the youngest regions in the world with a young society, new people entering the workforce by the tens or hundreds of thousands every single day. So what do you see in terms of the industries that are best positioned to drive development in Africa into the future, and particularly to support the aspirations of young Africans entering the workforce? I'd love to hear where you see sort of the potential industrial drivers. And I'll come to you, Dr. Tangara, and Achaleke too with the same question.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you everyone for being here. It's my pleasure to be here today. And I was very impressed about from your introduction. You didn't even need to look at your notes and what's the background and so on. So congratulations on that. So what is the macroeconomic context that we have right now in Africa? The growth, economic growth is slowing down to 3.6% from 4.6% last year. We have the global inflation because of the rising food prices and energy prices. The borrowing costs are rising as well, and countries have a lot of debt. And so, what are the best industries that would, present the best opportunities for you? First of all, what are the problems that the youth have in Africa? It's access to capital, lack of skills, and lack of decent jobs. So I would say that the best industries, it's not, the ideas are not revolutionary, it's just based on the data, but based on the evidence that's out there. It's really to create not only capital intensive industries, but also mainly labor intensive industries. And that's not mining for sure. And we know, for example, that when we did the stock take of the investment of US to Africa in 2014 during the US Africa Summit back then, that was organized, the first one that was organized by the Obama administration, 31% of the greenfield investment in Africa went into mining and extractives.
So let me get that right.
Yeah.
You said 31% of greenfield investment, so almost one in every $3 went only to the mining
To the
industry.
mining and extractives, yeah, that's the situation. And so when we look, the data is not available yet for the last figures, but between 2016 and 2020, that's still the case. So investment, greenfield investment, which means the new investments that have gone into Africa has been in mining and extractives. And we know that that's really capital intensive industry. It's not very labor intensive. It's not really creating jobs. And for the case of Madagascar, for example, we have mining in cobalt and nickel. There are tech sectors within that mining industries that are not, that the youth cannot do. And we had to import laborers from the Philippines, for example. And so what other industries? I think the number one is agribusiness. And when we say agribusiness, it's not about just producing again, food, because we need to ensure to feed Africa, the people, but also to create value. So, and it's not just, for example, I see also not just producing cotton, but going into textile industry. So creating value in the agribusiness, like a country like Madagascar again, we also have, for example, medicinal plants where we have the potential in pharmaceutical industries and to export that in Africa. So these are the areas in agribusiness that we can definitely do that, the youth also can have opportunities. The other jobs, again, are in construction and transportation, and lastly, energy and ICT. Energy, because energy at the end of the day is the basis for digital transformation, for energy intensive industries and so on. So it's always the basis. And you need technical skills, whether it's in renewable energy or the different sources of energy. So these would be, I would say, the sectors that I think would present the best opportunities for the youth. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. I think that's really interesting. I think that point of mining, and particularly talk about sort of the absurdity in Madagascar with the unemployment rate being what it is, and growth industries, cobalt, nickel, central to the electric vehicle technology, and yet importing labor from the Philippines, despite sort of the high unemployment. It's quite striking. And let me come to you, Dr. Tangara. Just shared some of the perspective on, I think, where there are opportunities for jobs, particularly within the formal sector and employment. You're an expert on informal economies and how young people sort of make their living in and outside of the formal economic structures. What do you see as the opportunities for those industries and how they might interact with some of the formal economic systems that Pino was sharing?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. First, I would like to thank the organizer by inviting me to take part of this panel. Which one I think is a relevant one because it raises a fundamental question related to the development of economy, and discussion is related to the competitiveness and the productivity of the whole economy and the individual also at the microeconomics level. So I think the fundamental question should be how this industrialization contributed to transform the structure of the economy by increasing the productivity and the competitiveness. When I put the question in this way, I think it is about the whole structure of the trade, the world trade, and the share of Africa in this trade. When we have in mind that it has been a stereotyped role for Africa by just only exporting the raw material without any additional value created because of lack of industrialization. So when we look macroeconomically speaking, the situation of the industrial in Africa, we can see the lower participation of this kind of industry to the creation of GDP, only representing only 14%, and also only just 1.5% of the global manufacturing from Africa in the global manufacturing in the world. And when we speak about the trade, it is quite difficult for young people, or even we can say, in general speaking, it is quite difficult to start a business because of the problem of administration, because of lack of investment, or because of lack of financial. Let me say this: when we take in consideration the investment, we can see the misleading of those kinds of financial aspects, because the most important investment is directed to the mine sector or the telecom or something like the business with those sectors can contribute really to create a job or to create a value added for young people. And let me say that for the informal economy, the problem is especially the lack of financial set or lack of investment for those kind of people working in the sector like agriculture. And we know for African countries, this sector is the most important one for creating a job and creating added value for the economy. And for me, the opportunity or the challenge should be to change the way we are seeing the industrialization of Africa by putting in place a good system for industrialize and transform the raw material in place before participate to the trade by exporting those raw material. As an introduction, that's what I can say for now. The challenge is to transform this whole structure of the economy of Africa by putting in place the system from which we can industrialize and we can encourage the transformation by creating the added value in place.
Thanks a lot. And I think that's really fascinating, the way you also highlight the degree to which the growth and the dominance of the informal economy in Africa is not only a fact of sort of the individual choices that traders make, but the product of a formal economy that is in some ways aggressively hostile to young people who are participating, whether that's through the bureaucratic red tape that you described, the lack of access to sort of formal capital flows, all of which impede the access to regional markets or the ability to participate in trade beyond borders, beyond a community. Let me come to you, Christian. You know, we know that in countries that are experiencing crises, in countries where peace is lacking, the economy is often in the most precarious position, and a lot of analysts point to sort of the vicious cycle of material wants, a lack of participation in the formal process, and in the violent crisis. Where do you see the opportunities and the key kinds of industries in the places like those you work in the constituencies that you serve, where economic investment has the opportunity to transform lives?
Well, thank you so much, Mike. And indeed, it's a very taken, and I really love the fact that you bring up perspective from a content perspective. And I might not be the best economist, but my experience of working on the field, seeing how conflict affects, the economy from start to finish, to situations where people don't think about access to formal jobs. People have to start thinking of creating opportunities that can respond to the issues that they are facing, and at the same time, feed them at the same time. And that's what we are seeing. But when there's insecurity, there's this challenge of your safety and protection, and that's what makes it even much more complex. Where places where you have factories that were transforming different things that they have left, for example, because of that. And for the ones who have tried to stay, they have been victims of kidnap, harassment, and all of that, making it very important for people to rethink, on how do you sustain. I'm coming from Cameroon, where we currently have a similar kind of situation where we have regions, things are not really working, but there's an opportunity there to be able to look at how we can create new opportunities or build on old ones, but taking into consideration the conflict situation. I take, for example, what we are seeing in the context of Cameroon is the tech sector, for example, in some of these regions. Because young people have understood that with technology, they do not really need to have maybe physical contact sometimes in these spaces. So we are seeing, I give an example, a region like the Southwest region, we have the Silicon Valley thing now, where we have many young people working across technology, and we are seeing that they are able to thrive, they are able to stay resilient despite how challenging things are. We have instances where on Mondays, people don't go to work, you can imagine. And to be able to beat that, then they can work from home, they can choose actually for that to happen. What's also very interesting is how the creative industry is also really growing. If you look at Nigeria, it's one of the most rising now, and this has no barrier. Light on NEPA or not, they use their phones and they create. When light comes, then they post on the internet. And this is also responding to issues around mental health. If you saw during COVID, a lot of people shared testimonies of how the creative industry in Nigeria, for example, was able to respond to, how they felt idle and all of that. So I think that in these instances where the social tension does not provide spaces for businesses to thrive or job opportunities to be created, young people are thinking alternatively and ensuring that they stay safe while creating these opportunities. And today we can see them riding very expensive cars. We can see them taking care of their families, and not even thinking about going into government paid jobs any longer. So I think that it could count on an opportunity. But one thing which is very interesting to learn and mind is how do we take these experiences from country A and to share with country B? This is something which is still not really happening, and that's why the conversation around US-Africa relationships, there's a lot that we can learn from the United States time, how they've been able to build on such industries.
Thanks a lot. And I'd like to come back with a question to each of our economists, but also please I'd love to make this an open conversation. So please think about what kind of questions and objections here, but also Sarah is navigating our online participation. I already see that there's 1 or 2 questions coming in, and she'll be monitoring that. So those online too, please insert your questions into the chat. But before we do that, I'd love Dr. Tangara for you to pick up where Christian left, which was also highlighting the challenge in learning across African societies from economic development models. You talked earlier about sort of the challenge of stereotyping Africa as just a producer of raw exports, a stereotype that goes back to the colonial era, it goes back decades or if not centuries of trade flows. But what's the prospect? We have Africa now as one of the largest free trade zones in the world. What do you see as the opportunities and the prospects for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and other efforts to really turn into greater sort of intra-regional trade, intra-African trade? Over to you, Dr. Tangara.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I was saying, the most problem is when we see the structure of our economies, you can see the key role played by the sector of agriculture. And then you can see the role of the market and the self-job creation. For what? Because the most reason is, in my point of view, because the people are not more skilled. Like we want to be in competitiveness and to participate in the formal sector. From that, people are after the school are directly direct to the market by creating them for them self-job and by putting in place their own business. But the fact is, those business created by this kind of people will have lack of competition because of lack of electricity, because of lack of capital, and because of the problem of the guide, the quite well guide from the government or from the private sector. So when we see the participation from the formal sector, we can see this kind of sector cannot contribute like we wanted to dynamize, to put a well dynamic of the economy. And then this sector are pulling all the attention from the government. So we have a good share of the population in the informal sector, but those share which can create value, which can create a job, which can contribute to promote the economy is neglected from the corporation or from the government, or even though those kind of cooperation, when I can take the example of the foreign direct investments, you will see those foreign direct investments are needed to the banking or to the telecommunication services or to the mine sector. And from that perspective, we will see the only interest of the government is to find more possibility to have more resources from those resources natural by exploiting the mine sector, by exploiting, but without any dynamic of competitiveness or transformation or something like that, which can make the economy of Africa to be competitive. So we cannot take advantage for the cooperation, international cooperation, without those kind of strategy. And I think the problem is the lack of those strategy of the development. And we have to think broadly within our economy by putting our own strategy in place to have an idea to contextualize the economy and the role of the economy, and to have the endogen of a system of industrialization. I don't know if I get clearly your question, or if my answer is relevant.
No, that was really helpful, and I think I see some questions. We'll have some questions from in an open discussion in just a second. But before I do, I wanted to ask you, if you could just pick up, if I can be a little bit provocative, these are not your words but mine. You highlighted, and Dr. Tangara did as well, the need for a shift in investment strategy and international trade away from just investments that can drive economic growth and benefit the government to investments that can benefit the people. You highlight the mining industry as an example that may contribute to the balance sheet of the state, but isn't creating jobs. You also noted that this was a topic in 2014, last time we had a US-Africa Leaders Summit. Today, we're starting the next iteration of that leadership summit. You didn't call last year's efforts or last time around's efforts a failure. I might call it a failure if it hasn't led to those promises, at least on the economic front, to translate to something that will be real. So let me ask you, what do you hope happens this week? Are there things that can happen this week where the Biden administration could really move the needle on how the US supports the kind of economic transformation that you, Dr. Tangara and Christian are describing here?
Thank you again for the question. Of course, I wouldn't call it a failure, because we are very grateful that we had that first summit, US-Africa summit already. Does it work?
Oh, thank you. Okay, perfect. So we're grateful that we have that. So what would I like to see happening in this summit is, first of all, that there are commitments with a plan of action. And when we talk about these commitments, it's about the volume of investment from US to Africa, because US actually is now ranked number 4 behind China, Russia, and UAE in terms of investment to Africa. And so China is number 1 at 71 billion between 2016 and 2020 again. The US investment to Africa is still at 23 billion US dollar. And also that this investment should be diversified. So increase the volume, but also diversify it, because again, as I said, it was more or less in the mining sector, which is good for growth, but not for labor. I would like to see also commitments in terms of investment in infrastructure. I know the US in the strategy towards Africa already mentioned different initiatives, and especially the partnership for global infrastructure and investment that the Biden administration has announced at the G7, and it includes, it's to complement the different initiatives that are already happening, like Prosper Africa, Power Africa, Feed the Future, and some activities as well in climate. The other thing is, because the last summit was in 2014, we didn't talk about, it was just the Millennium Development Goals. I would like this summit to be where we have the priorities of the US aligned with the priorities of Africa. And when I talk about the priorities of Africa, it's also about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, because back then we were with the Millennium Development Goals. And especially 2 of these goals, these SDGs, SDG 7, which is on access to energy, affordable energy, and also SDGs 8, again, on creating decent jobs for everyone. And what do I expect as well, those in terms of those commitments, that the US keeps its market open to Africa, so that we extend as well the AGOA, the Africa Growth Initiative. Africa, the AGOA. I was talking about the Brookings Center, sorry. And as well that, because US being an international player, it can always, whatever the US does, should think about Africa, how it affects the African countries internationally, whether it's about the ODA, the Official Development Assistance, or how it affects as well the financial sector, for it being a big move. So these are the things, but also, so these are the US part, but the African leaders have to make commitments, on creating an enabling environment, making sure that, you're at this moment, for example, to tell them, okay, come to Mali is a little bit difficult because of the conflict and the security issue, but to tell the investors, but so these are types of commitments that the African leaders can promise at this summit.
Thanks a lot to tuck in there. But I see there's also a lot of wisdom in the room. And so let's open it up. I see in the back corner, and let's have a conversation with some questions for our moderators, and also reflection from the group that's gathered here. And if you can also introduce yourself, if you can stand and introduce yourself as you.
So Dr. Maret, you just mentioned about investment in Africa, and you said that China is the leader with 71 billion, and the US is like, you said 25.
23.
So in my mind, I'm a little staggered, because one would anticipate that the US would be the leader, with more so of people of African descent being in the US. I mean, outside of Brazil, I think the US is the largest population, has the largest population of African people outside of Africa, right? So one would anticipate that we would have maybe $250 billion invested in Africa, as opposed to 23 billion. So I don't understand why there's so little interest in investing in Africa, considering the history of what has happened with us leaving or our ancestors leaving Africa the way that we did. Now to be able to give back to Africa the way that we should. That's my question.
And for those who are following online, if you can hear, we have a question focused on why the U.S. lags China and others, and why the bilateral trade between the U.S. and Africa is so low, considering the deep ties, in particular the large diaspora community and people of African origin here living in the U.S. Maybe we'll take maybe there are two additional questions and thoughts, and I'll take you, and then we'll come on back for another round, but you in the front row.
Thank you. I'm Mathieu Achaleke, associate professor.
And if you could please stand.
Okay.
This is how we get our morning exercise.
Okay, thank you. I'm Mathieu Achaleke from the University of Bamako. I'm associate professor for international relations, and I'm here as Fulbright scholars. So I have two concerns. The first one is that how one economy can be prosperous and profit to the local ones when on site there is no giant industry. What I mean is that when you look at Africa, mainly in Francophone Africa, we do not have the giant industries one that can produce job for people. Nobody can come from outside to create a job for anyone. It is the economic leaders in the country who can invest and produce job for their own people. The history is there. The second question is that what the US is doing when you take the Francophone countries, how can youth be fruitful, invest in their own economy when they cannot obtain credit from the bank, the private bank over there, and when the central bank is controlled by the strangers? When we take the case of the US, can we imagine that US control the central bank of Europe and Europe can be developed? No, but why? And how US is helping African countries and African leaders to free themselves from this kind of monetary colonialism that French government is still doing today in Africa. She asked a very good question. When we see here in the US or around the world, you know, Madeleine Albright once said that US liberate people from the tyranny. But why US is not liberating Africa? We have many diaspora Africans here in the US. And I'm very sad that US just have 23 billions in Africa. How is it possible? And China, Asia, where, I'm sorry to say that, where Africans are, persecuted, African continent opened their door to Chinese investment, and the US is there as the leader, is there looking just for Africa. What are we doing? And what is the Biden administration is doing right now to help African people to develop their own economies? She talked about AGOA, African Growth Opportunity Act. But the fact is that when we take the country like Nigeria or Benin, we do not fit our entrepreneurs. They do not, the quota that the US give to us, we cannot produce to fit this quota. So what US is doing to help these entrepreneurs to take profit from the AGOA and now from the MCC? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a number of rich questions, but I think I'll focus on two of those that I'll direct to our panelists in just a second. One was the question of how African economies can transform themselves without a major industrial base that links national interest to employment and productivity of young people. And the second was a question about sort of access to credit for young people, macroeconomic colonialism, foreign control of the central bank, which I take as an allusion to sort of the CFA franc, which for those who aren't following, is linked to the euro and also diminishes Francophone African nations' control over their monetary policy, particularly in the wake of COVID, has been in global challenges, has been a point of great public discussion. Let's take the last question in the white sweater, and then we'll come around in a second.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. I'm from Gambia, the General Manager of the National Enterprise Development Initiative, established by the Ministry of Youth and Sports. We are responsible for empowering young entrepreneurs to participate in market. See how they get access to finance. And my contribution is to see how the US would be able to work with Africa, just like the way they work with Germany after the 1945. We want to have a direct funding arrangement, collaboration, not support. We want to work partnership relationship with America. So ensure that our local produce are well processed and material are provided. We have been producing a lot, but some of these productions are hard because we don't have machines, we don't have factories to produce them. And if we produce them, we don't meet the standard quality that is expected within Kabul. And it's becoming a challenge. I don't want even to go to the discussions that we have. The investment coming from China is very appealing. And in Africa, we cannot just leave it there. We have to go for it. And the historical relationship between Africa and the US is greater than the relationship between China. So we call it divided administration, open the doors, and ensure that they are able to work with us with partners. I also come to Samba, Douala, you can see factories, they're all dead. There's no work in those factories. And we want those things to come back so we can produce in Africa and sell in Africa. The only thing is we Africans have to have integrated. We have to ensure that our local produce are produced and we sell them within Africa. The juice that we are importing, the chickens that we are importing, we can be able to produce this and integrate Africa. If Nigeria is having surplus on rice production, while Gambia is importing rice only from Pakistan, from India, we can be able to work together. And this is where we want the US to help us to strengthen those economic lines. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. It's a number of rich questions, and we'll come around after we hear from our panelists to do another round. But maybe let me start by Christian. Let me direct some of the questions around access to finance for young people and participation in the workforce to you and investors to you. Dr. Tangara, I think this question of industrial base and the kinds of industries that link national to employment, I think is really useful. And I'd like to hear from both you and Fino any of these questions about the degree of autonomy that African governments have in setting their own monetary as well as trade policies. And then I'd love to also hear from you on this question of what will it take from the US side, as you've taught here in the US, you've taught a number of young Americans, including from the African diaspora. What will it take from the US to really leverage that as an asset to drive its partnership and its trade with the continent? But first over to you on capital access for young people.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. I'm a young person, and I should say I've been feeling the same branch. It's very, very challenging to access resources. Either the restrictions for accessing this money, the demands are very higher. So what happens is that in most of our countries, they set up small, medium-sized enterprise program, very nice on books and everything. And when you go there, you create the enterprise, then you do not meet the standard to access loans or whatsoever. It's a big issue, which is affecting a lot of young people. Brilliant ideas keep dying every day because of access of funding. But I think we have an opportunity in terms of tapping into the diaspora community. In Cameroon, I grew in a community where many of the good things you see comes from the diaspora. Unfortunately, most of our countries still do not accept one nationality things and all of that, making it even difficult. A country like Nigeria has very high remittance coming from out. I think we have an opportunity here where the US government could also make things easier for money to be sent from US and other African countries. If our governments cannot give us loans, then I think diaspora communities can also support. In a country like Gambia, we saw how the diaspora community mobilized a lot of money during elections. I think that we need to look at now from a different perspective. If the world is so strong that we cannot break, I think there's that opportunity that we can look alternatively. And with access to technology now, sending money is not the same way it used to be Western Union alone. We have many other platforms. There's mobile money now where people can access money. And trust me, I have seen many more young people today in Africa who are able to access loans or resources to start up their businesses through trust funds set up by diaspora community. And in this room, we have many of such. I think that it has to become a culture. And if our governments and the international development partners are making it very difficult for us, let's create a new strategy, which is already working. And I think that we'll be able to beat this. And trust me, when it starts working, from my experience, we are going to be followed, and it's going to be the talk of the century. I think this is the advantage that we can bring into this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks and for highlighting, we talk a lot about the extractives industries and the agriculture, which was incredibly meaningful, but the US has some of the most developed capital markets in the world, a vibrant fintech, a financial tech investment ecosystem. And I think it's easy to forget that in the context of some of the other industries. But while we talk on industrial transformation, let me bring it over to you, Dr. Tangara, Professor Tangara, on this question of the industrial base. And if you do want to also touch about the role of African autonomy in economic planning.
Thank you. I think from this question, I can see some challenges. The first one is the problem of lack of focus. When we take in consideration the policies for the economy management from our countries, we can see the problem of lack of focus in the short and the long or middle term. The policies are not conform about our with the interests of the population or the actors in the economy. Second, we can see also the problem of lack of responsibility. When we are talking about the industrialization or other kind of cooperation, we can see from our leaders they cannot take the full responsibility for the general interests of the population or for the development of the economy. And we have also a problem of bias in the sector, private sector. What I mean with that is when we see the profile of the owners of the business in our countries, I can talk about the Mali, we can see the business are owned by those working in the public sector or in the administration sector, which can lead to a problem of the fairness about the challenge and the police put in place for the development of the economy. And from this perspective, those people working in the informal or those young people starting by creating their own job, they can not provide from the government the fairness about the investment, the fairness about the trade, the fairness about the understanding, or the fairness about doing the business. And the other thing is the lack of the strategy. When we took in consideration the policies about the development economic, we cannot see a clear strategy taking into consideration the short or the middle or the long process or the long term. And each government will find its own way to do things by ignoring the earliest police settled down in place, and we cannot see the continuity in the process or the continuity in the strategy. And that's why we have some problems with our local production, or we have those problems with the job creation, or we have those problems to lead correctly the cooperation and the investment from all the cooperation. And I think this summit will be like the others, by just gathering the leaders and just putting things in the document, and they cannot follow by stepping down by putting them in realization.
Thank you so much for that. And before I come to Fino, I'd like you to join me in a preemptive round of applause. Christian is slated to address the Human Rights Forum in a few minutes. And everyone knows if you offend Amnesty International, they're excellent letter writing. And so, so please join me in a round of applause for Christian preemptively. Thank you, and thanks for joining us today. Good luck getting over to the forum. And please, I'd love to hear from you on this question of how do we leverage a diaspora, and any more thoughts on the autonomy in economic planning.
Well, before she went out of the room, but before I answer those questions, I wanted to answer her question about the, why does not. So I wanted to answer a question. You came back. Thank you for being here. So your question is really about value-based investment. That we've done something to Africa. We are here to give back, and how can we be fair? But when you look at the studies that are on what are the drivers of investment to Africa, the studies always point to the market size. Is there market? Is there purchasing power from these people to buy things that the US will be producing when they invest in? It's also about the risk, and the governance and so on presents risks. So that was a problem. Africa has always had ties with its colonial ties, and so these are also the drivers of the investment. When people go to invest, it's not about thinking, oh, how fair can I be? How can I think about African and giving back? It's always now it's changing, because we are thinking about how can I be sustainable, for example, how can I be good to the environment, and how can I invest into activities or sectors that are good to the environment. But they have not asked the question, how can I be fair to the people who have given to me? Like we talk about US investments, and that's something that we need to work on. And I think there is some work being done already in that area on value-based investment to Africa, in addition to, investment that are sustainable and mitigating climate change as well. On the breaking the cycle of this, I think what US can do is they cannot go talk to the UK or to France, and say, okay, you guys have issues, you need. It's not that, but it's about empowering the African leaders, the African youth, the civil society, and having having that capacity to find the solution for themselves. And when I say, for example, digital payment, mobile banking, and mobile money, we pay. In Africa now, for everything, most of the things, especially in urban areas, with the mobile payment. Now across borders, we can also, within countries, for example, in Madagascar, there are free telecom companies equivalent to T-Mobile and Verizon. There is Orange, Telma, and Airtel. And before, I could not, send money to people who was on Airtel because I was on Telma, or send to Orange, but now it works. And the same thing now I can, I'm sure, send to other, people in other countries. And that's also a way to break that cycle. I think that's one innovation that can break the cycle. Your question on the industry. So I see that as well in different countries where, agriculture products are being rotten in the market, not finding the market. But at the same time, we face the dilemma that there are people starving, not having food. And there is a huge problem because of that. But what the African Continental Free Trade is trying to address is exactly that, to create the market and to invest in different infrastructure to connect borders in order to enlarge that market base for the population. But we need to invest in that infrastructure that we need to connect the borders. And when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just the physical infrastructure, it's about roads and, airlines and so on, but it's also the infrastructure, again, in terms of payments that I said. It's also, creating the enabling environment for the companies again. And this is always where we are lacking corruption. When we do, intra African trade, we have faced roadblocks, how many safety checks you have to go through. And these are the things that need to be addressed as well. Most of the time we talk about when these politicians go on electoral campaigns, they don't talk about regional integration, but only when they attend the AU summit and all those. It's when they're really hard on those. So sometimes there are those issues to be addressed. Did I address or I've gone too far?
No, I think that was excellent. So let's take 3 quick rounds. I see in the light blue or green shirt, the gentleman in the gray suit, and then Sarah, is there anyone online who has a question for us? Okay, no questions online. So that's great because we're running up to time anyway. So let me take these 2 questions and then offer them to you two as well as a final thought.
Investment opportunities that we select from Africa to be presented alongside the UN before. We're in fact industrial based in Kenya. We focus on investing in people and women. We do that across sectors, food, health, education, and climate. Like you mentioned, not many different sectors on the panel, but it's very good to hear the panel has been on investing in education and human fidelity. In June this year, the IFC has put the K-12 education sector on exclusion list, next to tobacco, weapons, fossil fuels. We're looking at 1.4 billion young people by 2030 that will not go beyond the first year of secondary school in mostly low-income countries. And of course, Africa is at the epicenter of that. So we're still, falling short of cultural bias in terms of where the customers are coming from and the views, whereas where it's actually needed. And we literally can't invest in any sectors without education. How do we invest in healthcare without nurses, maternity doctors, opticians, pharmacists? We can't. How can we invest in food without the education element? We can't. So really like to hear the panel views on how do we look at people bringing credit capital to the education sector.
Thank you, Madam. Rising Mohamadu. So my question is, so recently we went to Kenya and we had an investors with us that we traveled together. The problem was the investors from US and Panelists, and they wanted to do a fertilizer plant. And the biggest challenges we faced was getting data, like 10 years data, and the waste product, the food waste product, and all that. And what we realized is there's a lot of food waste products, there's a lot of food waste, but there's no data on how much they collect and all of that. How can the economists, the panels here, what they can see, what will be the infrastructure that needs to be held, especially in countries like Africa right now, who are ready for investments, but they don't have the data. Decide how can and that infrastructure is well placed when the investors are already there, because we have learned that every person we meet and every government official we meet, they're ready for investment, but there's no data to them. And so that is also an issue that we have.
Wonderful. That's 2 excellent questions, I think, to wrap up our discussion with 2 excellent researchers and educators. The questions are on the role of private investment in the education system in Africa, and particularly in the K-12 or sort of the up to secondary school system, as well as the role of data, particularly in the rural agricultural sector in Kenya or in other sectors, of the question of access to data as an inhibitor to investment in the continent. So maybe I'll switch order. Let's hear from you first, Fino, and then we'll hear from Dr. Tangara to answer those questions and any final thoughts from you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I fully agree with you. It's very important to invest in education, and the women actually behind you invest in education, and especially in apprenticeship, which is really important. When I was working in Madagascar, and this is something that I always felt as difficult, is that we invest so much in infrastructure because it's also construction, is good on the figures for growth. But then what you don't think about is, you haven't invested so much in education. If these hospitals, will we have doctors overnight? Will we have nurses overnight? It's not happening overnight. And so It takes time, and we need we can't emphasize enough to invest in skills, and also to make sure that these skills that we produce match the demands of the job market. Again, as I said, in construction, the different jobs, whether plumbing or anything, it's also in energy. Female technicians in energy or whatever, it's very important, and of course the healthcare system and production of pharmaceutical products as well, and how to transform and take part of the value chain. How do we get there? I think it's again it's part of the fairness and investment that we need to do, where we need to emphasize that at least that should be a commitment, that like the same as, African governments invest in education, like 10% of their GDP, we can also tell investors, or, US could commit into saying, okay, we need to invest in skills. When you guys invest, it's not just thinking about what are the drivers investment. It's not just about profit, but we always think about the people. How can we make sure that it benefits the people always, and that it's directed to that? In terms of data, I agree with you. It's a big issue, but I think it's changing, and they're trying to produce. One thing, for example, as well, that I see is, people in Africa don't have IDs, and you need to have, personal identification for you to access different services, to even have, different, to have activities. And when you go into e-commerce, let's say, you don't even have a physical address, it's very hard. So that's there's still a lot of work. When you, let's say, order something on Amazon, you just put your address, you get it delivered. But when you order something in Africa, you have to say, okay, at the gas station, turn left, and then make a right at the pharmacy. And you see, you have to do that because you don't have the addresses. So there's still a lot of work to do in producing the data, not just in terms of agriculture, food waste, and so on, but also data in terms of each individual. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Tangara, for any final thoughts as well as reaction to those last two questions.
About the investment in the education sectors, I think it seems to be a big challenge, especially for those countries facing the conflict challenge, like Mali. We have some parts of the country without access to the school, and after that, in normal situation, people are going to school, but they are not more skilled when they finish it with the school. That's a big problem. Even though some business are created, and those owner of business are lack of the more skilled people to give them job. And sometimes there is a saying that the problem is not a lack of job in Mali, because we have a lot of to do about infrastructure, about production, but the problem is lack of the right people to engage in your business. And sometimes you can have some money to invest, but you do not have the right profile to engage in your business. And so about the infrastructure, yes, the infrastructure is the key, play a key role about the production. When we have an idea in mind, the role of the transportation, about to make the link between the production and the consumption, and we cannot produce without a proper infrastructure. And investing in those kind of infrastructure, like transportation or like a support building, can help very much to have the productivity and the competitiveness about the economy.
Thank you so much. And as we close, I'm really just struck by the conversation today and how it relates to also Special Rep Cormier Smith's opening reflection on the importance of equity, both in building more equitable transatlantic partnership, whether that's in equity and access to markets, including access to the American market, which we didn't talk as much about today, access to opportunities in education or access to capital for many of the young people across the continent to realize their entrepreneurial potential. And so as we go forward, after we're going to go upstairs, we'll have a brief break when we can take some food. We can take advantage also of the networking opportunities of everyone here. And then we'll be resuming in this room and in this Zoom screen for those following for discussion of climate change and U.S.-Africa partnerships as they relate to climate change. They'll be led by Gilbert Kadiagala from the American Studies program at the University of Wits University in South Africa. And then upstairs, we'll be having a conversation on the digital economy and digital connectedness in the U.S.-Africa relationship. And so those will be our two breakouts. But before we do that, it'll be a chance for all of us to get to know one another more informally, keep this conversation going. And for those who are following online, we'll see you back in either thread. And those who want to learn more about search and our work, you can follow us on Twitter at SFCG_. And you can find out about further events and keep the connection going online as well. Thank you so much. See you after this and upstairs.